Hi everyone, welcome to yet another episode of ImpactX. And today we are going to talk about the marketing function in the GCC context with one of the most eminent personalities in the marketing field itself. We have today Mr. Rohit Lodhi with us. Okay, so Rohit, what we see today is that GCCs have evolved from quite back offices to strategic innovation engines. Now, when we say marketing in the GCC context, what does that really mean and how does it differ from the as we know marketing, and how can it also help in building or shaping the identity of any maturing center?
I think so. It's a very interesting take. If you really look at it, GCCs have moved away from being just a back office long time back. I think so. They have more become brain offices with innovation, R&D being very critical in the entire component. The other, I think, so interesting angle that you're talking about is how does traditional marketing in the GCC context actually change? If you looked at marketing that we grew up in, was typically about the 4 Ps.
Yes.
And that's what was really applicable. But if you say superimpose a similar thing onto GCCs, it's not, the context is actually very, very different. First is it looks at 4 Is actually, and that's something that is also a culmination over the last 12 years working with GCCs. Earlier GCCs were in the form of captives, then it moved to BOTs, then it's offshore development centers, and now what we call is GCCs, GICs and other kind of things. Right. So the 4 Is that actually really define the marketing in the GCC context is around identity. The second one is around influence. The third one is around inclusion of the entire ecosystem that you're looking at. And fourth one is actually also impact. Because when you really put on a kind of a marketing hat, because earlier if you really looked at marketing roles were very comms, information, dissemination heavy. Yeah. But right now it just needs to look at it more from a marketing kind of a standpoint. And I think so that's the big shift that we are really seeing in the marketing from a GCC landscape.
I think it's leveling up.
It is. And, the aspect that we see, and I think so, alluding to your last question around identity, identity in the GCC context is also fairly different from a product or a service, typical conventional kind of a company stake, because here the entire thing is not what we have to offer to the customer, but it is, why do we really exist? And I think so this is a conversation that needs to be done with the entire set of stakeholders, whether it's a talent ecosystem, the principals that they need to connect with, the tech, influencing systems and industry associations that really relate to GCCs also. Yes. So identity in a GCC context really looks at 3 critical areas. And I think so one is capability itself. And when we look at capability, it's not, there are elements central to the whole thing is people, but there are also processes and programs that actually run around it. Right. So that's the capability side of it. And obviously it's really moving to innovation and impact. The second one is credibility itself, because there is always this entire thing is that it's an outsourced piece. Are you really integrated within the global ecosystem? Right. And I think so that's where the credibility story comes in. And there are 2 components to that. One is internal as well as external kind of credibility. And the third key area is actually culture also, because culture, no matter even if you are a GCC, the first word in the GCC is global. Right. And when you look at global, you are part of a global culture. And I think so the alignment to the global culture, and I think so that's where India also has an edge because of a cultural fluency. We also have in a way grown up in a complex business environment, and that we are also multilingual in that sense. So it automatically builds in that kind of a cultural adaptiveness that is very, very critical.
Yes, absolutely. Now that you mentioned about culture, now obviously culture often determines, whether a GCC merely delivers or really truly transforms, right?
Correct.
So why is internal communication so important here in driving belongingness in hybrid or, cross-functional setups in that case?
So see, the culture implication from a GCC standpoint is 2 aspects. And I think so this center of everything that we have is first is a distributed belonging. And distributed belonging comes in because there is a global setup that you are a part of. And there are a lot of being away and not being clearly sometimes perceived as being integral to the global organization, being a more offshoreized kind of a capability, there comes a kind of a challenge which has to be really looked at. What does really culture mean? And the culture cannot be deviant for a GCC from the parent company that they're actually really serving. So that's one area where, even some of the, I'll give you a kind of a case where we were working with a kind of mini GCC outfit, which was a European firm. And I think so one of the first mandates that we really looked at is actually looking at a global one kind of a tonality and the vision and values that we really operate in. So that's the cultural fabric, because culture defines the kind of social fabric.
Yes.
And the other determinants around the culture also is that it starts in a way defining what not only exists as a GCC, but how are you going to scale and what are you going to attract.
Absolutely.
And I think so those are key elements that start working from a culture standpoint.
True. So it's just not policy driven. It's also more like communication driven here when we talk about how can GCCs actually, transform or deliver the finest results.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
Okay. So also, Rohit, you mentioned that externally GCCs compete for talent, reputation, and ecosystem presence, right? So how does external marketing mean, like rather what it means for GCC, and how can it build or influence the visibility?
So influence has a very different dimension from a GCC kind of standpoint. And the reason is there are two components of influence. One is what is the internal influence that you have and what is the external influence. And influence also matters if you look at the overall thing is that close to around 72% of the professionals in GCCs really want a visible innovation kind of culture. Now, how do you really influence that? And you cannot influence that, just in what you say internally, but there is a certain kind of an external validation also that you want to really look at. So it's not what you are speaking about yourself, but is that influence also coming in from the business functions or the LOBs that you're really dealing with? And I think so that's the two parts that you're looking at. If you, there are a lot of kind of organizations currently have started also working with, say, external like specific channels like LinkedIn. So where there is a certain kind of, it's not about the shared services, but the shared success stories that start creating a kind of a positive influence. In certain scenarios where the GCC setups are fairly mature, there are also multi-locational GCCs. So in a way, there is an internal influence you want to create with the headquarters or the principals, where as a GCC India, how do you start looking at in contrast with, say, something which is in either Vietnam or, say, in contrast to kind of Mexico? So how do you really start looking at the entire influence ecosystem? And according to me, there are three influence ecosystems. And I think so the most under-leveraged one is the talent side, where they're looked at as something that you want to really have a communication with or probably need to be engaged with, but they becoming key influencers and advocates itself is one critical component. The second one is to do with specific industry associations. There are certain kind of bodies like the NASSCOM is. There is aspects like Zenov, which really start looking at where your maturity curve is. And I think so that's the second influence level. The third dimension that we see that is clearly emerging is also not your influence as a purely a business, and but it's also the society and the sustainability angle. All the more, we currently have a new gen, which is not only digital natives, but also AI natives who are coming into the entire workforce. And what they are expecting from an organization is not merely what is the work context and the work content, but what is it that we can influence them based on how are we as a social organization? What is the empathy? What are the internal community initiatives that you really do? So I think so that's the kind of overall communication influence layer that's really emerging right now.
Absolutely, it makes total sense, and also visibility isn't just about vanity, but it's about the strategic influence, and also considering all the factors that you mentioned are absolutely important in this context.
True.
Okay. Also, Rohit, we've always heard you talking about the CMO mindset. Now, in the GCC context, we want to know how can marketing leaders drive tangible business outcomes and also collaborate effectively with their leadership, because that's one important point that you mentioned.
Yeah, correct. I think so. There are two layers again here. Is that what is really marketing's role in the entire context? And the reason why I keep on speaking about the CMO mindset is that when you look at a CMO, the CMO looks at three key dimensions, which is reputation, relationships, and revenue. And that's, I think so, in a way, probably to be superimposed when we really speak about your role within a GCC. So the key marketing role is actually it acts as a kind of a transitory translating layer between what enterprise ambition is and what is actually happening. And I think so that's the bridging of the gap that really need to look at. If you look at even say Microsoft India clearly says is that, building from India for the world.
Yes.
And I think so that's one key area which is coming in again from an accountability standpoint, because marketing is always has to be accountable.
Yes.
So if you look at certain aspects in terms of, okay, let's take one dimension. For example, there has been a kind of a GCC evolution where we have to look at aspects of visibility, validation, and also the value that we continue to attach. Now, from a CMO standpoint, do the metrics that you report, not only to your GCC leadership within India or wherever that you are, but also to your headquarters or to your principals, has to be clearly defined and objective.
Right.
And it has to be objective. So in a way, how can you quantify? For example, let's take for a kind of a fairly higher on the maturity curve kind of a GCC, there are metrics like, what is the kind of net retention rate that you're looking at? What is the net promoter score with the headquarters or the LOBs that or the functions that you're really operating with?
Right.
The third aspect is to look at innovation adoption with the principal companies. Now, you might say that, we are innovating, but is the adoption really happening with the global firms? So, looking at the CMO mindset into your particular role is going to keep on getting more and more critical as we, GCCs today are called as global capability centers, offshore centers or whatever. But what I see is in the next 2-3 years, and there are indicators very clear that in the next 4 to 5 years, we'll get more integrated with the kind of global firms that GCCs are really a part of. So that's the importance.
So I think marketing becomes real leadership when it's shaped by business decisions, is what I feel, and it's just not about the narratives that go outside, right?
Correct.
Also, every GCC CMO, I'm sure, faces a challenge in balancing visibility without vanity and alignment without dilution. So we would love to know from you, what are the key challenges or best practices in building an internal brand strength for any maturing center?
Yeah, so I'll tackle it in two parts. The first part, what you spoke about, is the challenge. And I think so one of the key areas that most of the GCCs are facing now, as per one of the reports that I had read, where 63% of the CXOs are expecting innovation from the GCCs. While very contrarian to that is that the headquarters or the principal functional areas which are interacting with the GCCs still look at it as offshore.
Right.
And I think so that itself is a massive kind of a perception gap that we have to keep on bridging in. And I think so there are some companies like, for example, Capgemini, if you really look at it, they have a very strong narrative called as powered with purpose. And that starts aligning with how they are an integral part of the global chain. One of the aspects about, is if you really look at all the kind of NASSCOM conclaves that I've been a part of, Zeno conclaves that I've been part of, most of the leaders, GCC leaders, are actually complaining that there is no structured storytelling about the GCC. And
Right.
I think so that's one key area that most of the CMOs, chief heads of communications that we are looking at have to really start tackling. And the stories don't necessarily need to be purely from a GCC perspective. There are people stories that you can look at. There are leader stories. There are expertise-led kind of stories that you can look at.
Absolutely.
So, some of the interactions that I have done with certain GCCs, we have created what we call as story playbooks. which are on different tracks, which run differently for employees, run differently for subject matter experts, and differently for leadership kind of profiling. So that's one area. Then the second one is certain rituals that you can really look at. And these rituals are cross-functional interactions that are actually happening, that continue to happen. And I think so one of the key areas that should be really worked on is that some of these stories have to start coming in from the talent itself.
Yes.
Because I think so it works multidimensionally. It's the pride of the work, the content that they're working in, the context in which they are really operating, really starts creating a far more amplifying effect when you really look at, looking at it from the... So these, according to me, so the challenges still remain, and they will continue to remain because many GCCs are in different stages of their maturity curve.
Yes.
But what we increasingly see is that the more you get integrated, the more kind of, I would say the global alignment in terms of storytelling, that perception gap that you start. So there is one exercise that we did with one of the companies, which is a fairly mid-level kind of a GCC, is created what we call as a voice of a stakeholder. And this is not about employee satisfaction, not about customer satisfaction, but it's about the voice of the stakeholder. And we covered different components, and it's a kind of a 360-degree voice of stakeholders that we did. And it gave you so many insights and so many kind of story nuggets that you could really build on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I really like the storytelling concept that you just mentioned. I think that's very important. And with that, I think clarity is also important. Then only the alignment and the story goes out there, and, it can be resonated well by the teams who are working, by the leadership. So I think clarity and storytelling, I think both are very important when we talk about any GCC here. So Rohit, if we map GCCs from 1 to 3, how has the communication evolved and what defines the current phase? Also, as we know, the GCCs are shifting into innovation hubs as well. What are the skills and the mandates that will define the next gen marketing teams?
Oh, okay. So, again, there are 3 areas of this entire way in which I can answer it. I think so. What we are clearly seeing is the maturity of GCCs. The 1.0 version was more around optimization. And I think so that's where the story lied. The moment it moved to a GCC 2.0 version, it was more about effectiveness that you could really build in. I think so where we are moving with GCC 3.0 and in the kind of future is more around innovation and transformation. And given those kind of GCC contexts, what is it that you really want to speak about? Because there is no point in speaking too much about innovation when you are still in the first phase, in the early phases of your kind of a GCC kind of maturity. So those are kind of dimensions that you have to be very, very intuitive about. I think so. The second question that you asked is about
the skills.
What is it that the new marketing skills that you will need? Let me say that one is storytelling that which we really covered, is the ability to do structured storytelling, which is evidence-backed. I think so. That's one key area that we need to look at. The second one is a ability to do what I would call as design thinking. When I say there is an enterprise design thinking kind of a mindset that you can really look at. Third piece is to look at dialogue. Whenever we look at communications, it's mostly a one-sided, one way. But what is the continuous enterprise dialogue that you have between the enterprise and the employees, the GCC along with its principals? But what is the regular cadence? And it is also with a fair amount of listening.
Yes.
And I think so the more, I've always been a proponent of that. A good marketer is probably a 75% good listener and not really speaking about it.
Yes.
The other area which I see is the AI literacy. And AI literacy is going to have a fairly dominant play because that's a must-have when we really move to that kind of skill set. I see some kind of key roles also probably really changing. Somebody, it's more like a GCC experience designer. There could be somebody which is more like a data-driven, analytical metrics communicator, in terms of what is the outcome and the impact that you are really able to make. Right. So those are kind of key roles that we are saying. And one of the very interesting things, one of the companies has something what we call as a ESG evangelist. So
Okay.
not only as a company, what you're doing as a business, but as a social enterprise, what is it that you're really communicating? And I think so that starts creating a fairly, kind of a well-rounded piece in how we see that entire role evolving.
Absolutely. And like you mentioned, these skills involve part storytelling, part of analysis, and also it also includes which technology is leveraged in this. So all the skills should be spread across all these three factors, I believe.
Absolutely. Because see, unless and until you're not a multi-dimensional
Yes.
operator, because if it's going to be very unidimensional, I'm 100% sure that you will not be doing you'll be doing a disservice to your role as well as what the expectations from the business is.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Also, Rohit, you also mentioned about the class framework, right, which stands for credibility, leadership, adaptive agility, skill, diversity, and scalability. So, what does it personally mean to you? So, I would love to know your thoughts about this framework and how this can be adopted in GCC. Also, as we close this session, what message would you leave for the marketing leaders, especially for building the next gen GCCs?
Okay. So again, okay, you did mention class. I think so. That's one of the. It's not actually a model. It's more around a kind of a framework of thinking that marketing could work on. Because sometimes what happens is that we get dragged into one dimension, but miss out on the other dimensions given business compulsions or what is really driving it.
Yes.
So class is typically C for credibility, as you said, and I think so. We have covered this earlier. Credibility is not only of the company but the talent. What is the innovation that we provide? How do we really start speaking to the principals and to the external ecosystems? So that's one area that you're looking at. Leadership, according to me, has again components. It's not only who's the topmost GCC as a business leader, but also the subject matter experts and how are they really going out in the kind of marketplace. What are they speaking about? What are they curious about? What's new that's happening? So that's the piece that we're talking about, leadership. Adaptive agility is, I think, so fairly ingrained in the Indian kind of mindset. We have been fairly digital forward. In fact, if you really look at even AI from a standpoint, the way we really adapt to the entire thing is very, I would say Gen AI, in fact, adoption has been extremely fast. And I think so that's also the kind of value that you start bringing onto the table when you see the dynamics and the volatility that we keep on observing as far as the changes are concerned.
Yes.
Skills will continue to stay as the core. I think so. Clearly, we have the depth advantage, we have the diversity advantage, and we also have the unlearning and the learning kind of advantage. And I think so that's also to do with the ecosystem. If you look at the government itself has vision boards for different types of GCCs across industries. So it is right from primary education to the STEM education starts reflecting into certain kind of certifications that are offered by even from government and kind of private enterprises. So that's the skills layer, and I think so that's clearly a very arrowhead kind of an advantage that we really need to look at. And the scalability is the other aspect. I think so just from the sheer volume at velocity of the skill sets or the scalability that we can really offer to the world is entirely different. So I think so those are parameters that it's not a kind of model, but we always sit back, and I think so that's one thing that I'll say to most of the marketers, the digital, the comms leads and the brand leads to really look at these areas and ensure that at least in 3 to 4 of these areas where the needle is moving and how you can really progress on that entire thing. From a kind of a role perspective, I think so there is going to be more accountability. There is going to be more requirement of the ability to understand AI and its implications. And the third one is the reportability of impact, because it's not only about effectiveness on what are we say like we started with how many hours we delivered, what are the kind of productivity measures, efficiency measures, but it's more to do with innovations. It is more to do with impact, because those are the real transformational pieces, and the ability to really capture them, ensure that they are converted into specific modules that go out to the ecosystem in terms of as a communication. So I think so those are going to be fairly critical. But as I said, I'm no soothsayer. The world will keep on evolving, and as it evolves, I think so. But there are certain foundational aspects that we should be cognizant of, and obviously go with the entire thing of learning, unlearning, and relearning in an agile fashion.
Absolutely. So going forward, it looks like GCCs will be, defined by the impact they create or the trust they build, and obviously the scalability part you mentioned, and also you touched upon the evolution of the GCC in the Indian market and how it looks currently. Great perspective, Rohit, to know about the marketing function in the GCC context. Fantastic insights. A pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.